David Weinberger, who has a PhD in philosophy, and he's a senior researcher at the Harvard Beckman Center for Internet and Society. He also is a Harvard Schoenstein Fellow and a best-selling author. He recently was also the co-director at Harvard Library Innovation Lab. And this presentation is really interesting, where he is going to share and talk about the library graph. So let's give a round of applause.
Awesome projects, by the way. So I want to propose LibraryGraph, which addresses, it's important to note, which addresses two problems. And the first is that we've spent hundreds of years developing knowledge and information and wisdom around the culture represented by books and the other sorts of stuff that we've entrusted to libraries to take care of. That stuff, by and large, is invisible on the web, which means, of course, it doesn't exist. And so there's a missing piece of the internet infrastructure around this more traditional but very valuable culture. And the second is that libraries have almost no presence on the web, which means not only do libraries lose perceived value, but what they represent, the culture that they represent, also begins to lose perceived value. So libraries, of course, do have presences on the web, but it tends to be a portal for their users, well designed for their users, but it's not getting at the thing that I want to talk about. So the aim of LibraryGraph is to make everything that libraries know available on the web, where by library I mean not just the content, but crucially the metadata, the information about the content, and what librarians know, of course, and what their communities know. So want to get everything that libraries, in that sense, everything that they know available. So what do they know? They know a huge amount. They know what works exist and why they matter and how they matter in different contexts and how they're related formally, how all of these different items and works are related, how they're related semantically. They know how they're being used. Libraries know, and their communities have a sense of what the ideas mean to them, to the people who use them, to their communities, how these works of culture are appropriated by the community. In short, libraries know how culture matters, and that's not something we want to lose. So what can we do? Well, we could put all of the content up on the internet, but we can't because of copyright. So we can, however, put the metadata up, which is really good news because the mattering lives in the metadata. It's not the content, it's what people make of it, which is information that surrounds the content itself. So this is actually good news. So how do you do this? Well, you take this set of much more than this, but the authors and their works and where they've been and what they talk about, places they talk about and so forth, and you interrelate them. You find all of the connections that you can. And this is important because that's where mattering lives. And when something matters to you, it's because you see its relationship to other things and to you, and those relationships, that mattering is always relevant to a particular community. There's no universal mattering. It's always relevant to a particular community, where a community might be two people, might be a nation, could be the world. And it's terms very broad. So what you do is you find the available information. There's tons of it available out in the world already, and more coming obviously available every day. And you build an API, an application programming interface, so that three things happen. The first is that sites around the world, websites that want to use this data or even just point at it can. So now all of this information about the culture that we've developed over the course of hundreds of years is available to any site that wants to use it in a way that it simply is not now. You don't even know where to link a book to. If you want to reference a book, we don't know where we're supposed to link it. To Amazon? Not a great solution. Second thing that happens is because this is an API that gives access to data as if that data were local to anybody in the world, developers can build whatever apps and services they think of. And those apps and services are driven by the market, they're driven by passion, but they're always going to be very specific to some set of users and some set of needs. And the third group, which is actually not what LibraryGraph is aimed at, are end users. But you would want to, I assume, provide some type of query tool so that anybody in the world can ask a question of the sort that we simply cannot ask now. The information exists, it's just not available on the web. One of the challenges here is that library data is insanely complex. People who are in tradition, It's hard to imagine how complex library data is. It's been developed by humans for humans, often by people who are not trained in data science over the course of a couple hundred years. That's certainly the case. But it's incredibly deep and rich and literally endlessly connectable. There is no end to the connections that can be drawn among all of these pieces, and always with local variations, because mattering is always local. So I believe that the way to do this is to create a graph. A graph is a computer science thing where you take these nodes and you connect them as richly and densely as you can with relationships that are typed. That is, they express they express different relationships. That's why it's an endlessly rich. The possibilities are endlessly rich. If you've used Facebook, you have used a graph. They connect as much of the information that they have about us as they possibly can. They use this to direct advertisements at us and also to enable us to do the sorts of queries we can do at Facebook. If you've used Google, then if you've seen one of these information boxes, these are generally, I think maybe always, derived algorithmically from the Google Knowledge Graph, which is billions of connections among the many, many things that Google has been able to extract from the hundreds of billions of pages that it's indexed. So how do you build LibraryGraph? Well, you've got to do 4 things. The first is there's a tremendous amount of related work that's gone on in the world, much of it by libraries, but well beyond that as well. You have to convene people. The only way of doing this is collaboratively with as many partners as you can. Second is you have to compile data, but gather the existing data. Now this is a distributed system, so you're gathering the pointers to the data, but you want to find out what's out there and get access to it when it's open data. You want to pry open the back ends of libraries, which have a lot of data, but they're almost always in proprietary database transaction systems. There are things we can do to make that available for libraries that are willing. And generate new data. There's some very safe usage data that can be generated. And we can talk about that if you want. Fourth is you want to enrich it by finding the connections among the meanings, by doing text analysis, possibly if we can get access to the Google Books corpus. Don't want to make any of that content available, but we do want to use that in order to be able to see the relationships among the tens of millions of books that Google has scanned. And obviously you want to get users involved as well. Sorry, that was third. Fourth is you expose it. I'm not that good at math. You want to make this all available through open APIs, let it be downloadable by people who want to do computationally intensive work on this amazing set of data, and then provide end user and crowd-based tools. So the reason to do this, what you end up with is, we already have an infrastructure for search, we have an infrastructure for encyclopedia sort of knowledge, we have movies. If you want to know about movies, you can find out everything you want about movies in densely connected ways. What we don't have, we have a black hole when it comes to the sort of information, knowledge, and wisdom that libraries, we've given to libraries for centuries to be the custodians of. That's a black hole. That's what LibraryGraph aims at fixing, enabling us to see and access how culture matters. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation. How are you planning to entice libraries to participate in your program and give you that back-end data that you were talking about? Can you speak a little bit to that?
Well, at least half the question is, are libraries motivated to do this? And in my experience, generally, yes. So there's always the question of privacy that comes up immediately. Libraries have traditionally, and in the age of the web, even more so, I think, sort of stepped up their game as the guardians of privacy. It's not clear to me that their users care nearly as much about privacy as libraries do these days, especially in the age of the internet, where an opt-in system would allow people to. So there are always questions about privacy when you put those aside and you say, well, okay, let's not talk about usage data at all. Although I think there's a really clever thing to do about that. But let's not talk about usage data at all. Libraries are about openness. I mean, people don't become librarians because they're in it for the money. They're not going 10x in their investment. They are there because they care about making this stuff accessible. And so generally, now this is totally biased by the fact that I tend to hang out with librarians who are interested in this. So in my experience, they tend to be quite open to it. And there's certainly a cultural shift in libraries over the past 10 or 15 years. You can see it at the American Library Association, among many other places as well.
In terms of development for the technology, what kind of thought you have given to it? Because this is going to be a mind-boggling process.
It's incredibly difficult. And so many of the technologies are familiar, but doing it at scale and doing it, so for example, mining text to find relationships, entity extraction of text and trying to find relationships among them is not something that needs to be invented, but it does need, as always, to be refined. So I would like to say, because it would work better with a moonshot, to say, and there's an algorithm. There's one algorithm, and I'm just on the verge of developing it, but I really don't think that's the case. It's a matter of libraries having the vision and having the will, and the application of semantic web technology and data extraction stuff, text analysis, advancing those to the complexity of what let me give you, so it really is a matter of making existing techniques work in a more complex environment. And a really quick example of why this is so even at the simplest level, is so difficult, but really important to do, is that as librarians will tell you, there's no such thing as a book. If you want to read Hamlet, you are always reading some edition of Hamlet. And frequently, when we're going to argue about Hamlet, about was the ghost real, we don't care that you read it in paperback and I read it in large print. That's not the issue. But there are times when we exactly care about that. So even just at the level of sort of ontology of what a book is, that by itself is already a web and a map of relationships. This is a really difficult, or should I say chewy problem that I'm hoping computer scientists will find really attractive. I am not a computer scientist, so it's very easy for me to say. So, thank you.